after their stunning success, forcing the government to shelve $2.7 billion in tax hikes. Young Kenyans activists are setting their sights higher, taking aim at deeply ingrained corruption and misgovernance. Protesters say the finance bill President William Ruto abandoned on Wednesday was only a symptom of the problems plaguing a country where many young people face dwindling job prospects despite strong economic growth. This morning, Emmanuel Wa-Kyendo, Program Officer, Institute of Economic Affairs in Kenya, joins me to unpack this. Thank you so much for joining us, Emmanuel, on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So I'd like you to give us a true picture of what's happening in Kenya now. The finance bill has been withdrawn, but the Kenyan citizens, most especially the youth in the country, are saying, hey, there's a whole lot of issues that needs to be dealt with in the country, and this is just a first of many that they are looking to nip. Tell us what's happening in Kenya. Tell us the disposition of the citizens, and tell us what we are to expect in the coming days.
Thank you. So what is happening in Kenya is there's two separate pictures, right? There is a picture of the narrative about a generation rising up to assert themselves politically and to claim certain economic rights. Now, the underbelly of what is going on in Kenya is households across across all income strata are facing economic distress, right? So they're facing pressures on their income. They've been facing pressures on their wealth. When you look at, for example, their credit deposits or households holding livestock. So their livestock have been battered by droughts, and the holdings, the savings they had before the COVID period, actually they saw themselves become poorer after the COVID period. So then you add on top of that the inflation, which if you're a household that spends about 50% of your income on food, now given that the average household in Kenya spends 33% of their incomes on food, so the poorer you are, the more you spend, the more of that chunk of income you're spending on food. Well, you saw your incomes actually drop by as much as 15% since COVID. So you had a finance bill proposed last year, pushed through. It was successful. There were protests. Now this year, the government was probably a bit confident about its chances of pushing through this second finance bill, but it was unsuccessful. There was diffused uprising on the streets. You saw that across the country, across all income strata, people came to the streets and said no to the bill.
Okay, so let's look at the core provisions of this particular bill. Now, the president seems to be looking at a dialogue moving forward. For you, do you think certain provisions in the bill that was withdrawn may need to be reconsidered, maybe, remodified if we're hoping to have economic growth, of course, taxes to be paid, maybe there are some cushionings in there, maybe there's something that can actually speak to the situations that affect the people, whereby it can be a win-win situation for both the government and of course, the citizens?
Well, the first thing is the government is in quite a tight spot because if we go upstream of the finance bill and have a look at what inspired the creation of the finance bill, why it looks the way it does, you have the IMF conditionalities. These are conditionalities that the Kenyan government itself accepted, right? They sat down with the IMF and said, this is what we need to do in order to get out of the debt crisis. So the finance bill is a response, is a direct descendant to that. What the finance bill is attempting to do is to raise the revenues, right? By raising tax rates, modifying the tax regime. Do I see something in the in the finance bill that could please people? I'm not too sure. I think in principle, because the finance bill by its structure, not by what I can see, was too narrow and too high in terms of its tax rates and very complex. And then, so you have that on the one hand. On the other hand, you have many exceptions, right? That they leave, that exceptions that once you analyze, it looks like they are exceptions designed for those working in the administration. So then you combine that with the overall political climate, which is that since this administration came to power, they haven't been quite so conciliatory, right? So because they have been abrasive, it's not clear that it's changing the contents of the finance bill, shifting things here and there is what will please the people, because the people don't seem to be, to my knowledge, in the mood for more taxes. And yes.
Okay, so now, just as you have actually said, or rightly put, that the Kenyan government is in a tight spot, and of course, Kenyans are not ready to pay any other additional tax. What for you will be the most effective way to raise revenue while reducing reliance on tax hikes, and of course, minimizing the impact on citizens' cost of living?
You know, if the government could take something of you could call it a poison pill, reduce the size of government, right? Kenya's government, relative to GDP, is almost 30%. It's too big. You know, you compare to, say, the United States when it was at the same level of wealth, the government is just too big. I think that, for example, getting rid of parastatals, moving the government away from acting in private markets and having it focus on public goods. It's very difficult to sell to the government bureaucracy, but it would be that's one bold move that the government could make that would effectively shrink the tax bill.
Okay, Emmanuel, in retrospect, beyond immediate revenue needs, let's talk about the long-term economic policies that have been proposed by President William Ruto over time to actually address issues around youth unemployment and improve standard of living. Now, how effective are these policies been over time, and how likely are they to be in terms of helping to create sustainable economic growth and job opportunities for the teeming jobless youths in the country?
So the way that I look at it, I'm not sure that you specifically target the youth per se. And I think this kind of a framing of the problem seems to suggest that the core issue here is just youth unemployment. When we look at the causes of the current unrest, all households are in economic distress. So what kind of policies could stimulate economic growth? When we look at the finance bill and you have policies that are seemingly protectionist against imports, right? Let's take clinker, for example, where you have high tariffs on imports of clinker, right? Clinker is an input that you use in the manufacture of cement. And now, if cement is too expensive, right? What do you do as someone who wants to construct a house? You're going to change how you construct that house. You know, you're going to space out your consumption of cement. Now, you take that principle and zoom out a little bit and look at the finance bill as a whole and look at the government's whole approach to stimulating manufacturing growth. And you can see that reducing tariffs on manufacturing inputs is one way you could stimulate manufacturing growth. But what we've seen instead from this, yes.
Yeah, I actually understand, Emmanuel. Some people have talked about even the need for social safety nets. Maybe that could also, in a way, help in cushioning the pangs that Kenyans are facing right now, looking at the measures by the President William Ruto administration. Emmanuel Wa-Kyendo, Program Officer, Institute of Economic Affairs, Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Yes, and that's a wrap on today's edition of Business Edge. Thank you so much for being part of it. Don't forget that you can visit our social media handles at News Central TV. That is actually focal. And visit our website, www.newscentral.africa. Download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store. And equally, watch the entire stretch of the episode.